I would use a talk that I do for psychologists. They're postgraduate clinical psychology students, and I do a talk every year which is for about an hour and a half, and it is purely about my own experiences. So I'm there as for the students to kind of try and understand what it's like from a parent's point of view. And what I try and do in that talk is tell them about my story, but also talk about how we, in Kindred, most of the staff are parents of children with disabilities. We have 15 staff and 9 parents of children with disabilities. So we very much use our own experiences to develop the service that we think will be most useful for other parents. So I try and convey some of that to the psychology students to help them understand from a professional point of view what might be helpful to parents. So I'm just going to start with talking about my experiences of the early years. And then what we're going to do is divide into 2 groups, if that's all right, and just really brainstorm with those 2 groups. What are the things in your mind that you'd like more information about, so that we can then bring those back together. I'm then going to talk about a little bit about school experiences, and then we're going to put up those questions, and the thought of answering them myself is quite intimidating, because I'm sure you'll come up with a whole range of things, but maybe we can brainstorm on those questions together. There may be things within the group that you know that we don't know. So then I just want to talk a little bit about my own experiences of transition. And I was obviously thinking that a lot of you would have very young children, but my own experience is that even when my son was very little, actually I had quite a fear of the future, and it would have really helped to have heard from people who survived through transition. So that's what I'm hoping to do there, and then just a few minutes at the end to see if there's anything else we wanted to talk about. I didn't put in a break there, but maybe if there's a point where we all feel we need a break, we could do that. And then just another thing to mention, this thing here, when we were asked to talk about navigating through services, you know, I have to admit, I sort of went, you know, in 2 hours. And we are actually just about to relaunch our website. So Mel's come along, because Mel's going to be doing a lot of the work on that. Mel's from my colleague from Kindred. And we just thought it would be actually quite helpful, if you don't mind helping us with this, that we might ask you a few questions as we go along about how much information you think should be provided on our website about certain things, and whether we've got it correct in terms of the different areas we're providing information. So if that's okay with everyone, I'll start with that then. So the early years were really, really tough for me. My son was born at Simpsons, and he was less than 2.5 kilos. So I remember my husband coming back, and actually I was thinking the other night, I've never said this to him, but he came back to me and said, I wanted to put him in special care, but I've argued that we shouldn't. You know, he doesn't need it, and he was just below. Hi there. When my son was born, he was very, very small. He was less than 2.5 kilograms. 2.5 kilograms. And my husband said to me, he came back and he said, oh, they said that they want to put him into the special care unit, but they were wondering about it, and I persuaded them that he shouldn't go there. I spent the next 5 days in hospital, and it was such a terrible, traumatic experience, because basically my son couldn't feed, and I literally had no sleep for 5 days. I mean, one time they came to me and they said to me, we'll take him into the nursery because you're just not getting any sleep. So I said, oh, that's great, thank you. And they took him off, and I remember I had to put a sort of I was so exhausted, and I put sort of a wet flannel over my eyes to try and sleep. And about an hour later they came back and they said, he's crying, you know, you've got to come and feed him again. And what would happen would be there'd be one shift of nurses and they'd all be saying, feed him, feed him, feed him. And at that time, I think maybe even more than now, there were just a lot of pressure about breastfeeding. And then I'd be trying to feed him all day long. And then they'd be starting to get worried, I think, and off they'd go off shift. And a new lot would come, they'd be like, you've got to feed him, feed him, feed him. And they weren't realising themselves that they were just going from shift to shift and he wasn't feeding. So after 5 days, I think they did give us a bottle, and they couldn't feed him out of a premature bottle. And why they didn't twig something was wrong. So they had to make the hole bigger in order for him to drink. Anyway, they finally let us out, and it's like, thank goodness. But one of my early experiences was going along to one of those groups with other mothers, and I just kept saying to people, there's something wrong, there's really something wrong, and the health visitor would say, oh no, he's just a lean breastfed baby, I went along to this group, and by then I think he was about 6 months, and 6 weeks, and I just decided, no, I can't, he's not feeding properly, so I got a bottle for him. And I took him along to this group, and he went glug, 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 and drank this whole bottle. And he was this tiny little spotty baby, and there was all these bouncy, healthy babies. And he just sat up and went, it was literally like this. It went spraying out. And that, I just remember that, and I was so humiliated. I just felt so low, and everybody's faces, the horror in their faces. And at that point, we went to see the GP again, and he looked in my son's mouth and said, oh, that's so interesting, he's got a split uvula. And I said, well, is that why he's not, what does that mean? Is that why he's not feeding well? And they said to me, he said, he could have a very interesting singing voice when he's old. So I went back to the GP the next morning, different GP, and I said to her, there's something wrong. There's really something wrong. Please, can you see a paediatrician? And of course, I'd been bottle feeding him, so he'd put on weight. No, he's put on weight, he's fine. So then what happened, in fact, was we were watching a television program about cleft palate, and I just thought, that is what he's got. He's got a cleft palate. It's really obvious. And in fact, when this appointment came through, it was for the cleft palate surgeon. They didn't bother with the paediatrician at all. So, and what had happened was that they'd missed this cleft palate, even though actually he had a hole in the roof of his mouth. So that was our early experiences, and one of the things I just wanted to say was how, the emotional impact of it. I mean, when my daughter was born 10 years later, they made a huge fuss of me, and they constantly were offering me scans, and it was lovely, it's like I got a scan, every month. And I said to them, do you think, my son was really starving, do you think that's why he's now got learning disability? And I think they probably were a bit panicky about me saying that. So they arranged for me to see a paediatrician, and I went to see a really, really kind, nice man. He was very, very, sort of considerate, and sort of really went through whether or not he could have, explaining that just for 2 years they decided not to use the wooden spatulas to press down the tongue of the baby because they might get splinters in her mouth. And fortunately that just happened to be that time when, we were examined, and, ours was probably the only baby that was kind of missed. But I was thinking, it's so interesting that while that was happening, my actual feelings were, I'm wasting your time. I actually felt like I don't deserve you to be paying this attention to me. I'm just sort of, I don't... And I was thinking, that's so interesting. How could I feel that it wasn't valid, that they actually looked at why he was missed in that way, and it caused me so much grief that early years. Sorry, I always get emotional. I'm a very emotional person.
I'll be joining you in a minute.
Yeah. So this is to say why, in Kindred, we talk about emotional support, and emotional support is very hard to measure. But we know just from all our experiences, and we work with 700 families every year, that it's no good giving people information if you don't understand what they're going through, really, because information in itself, like what I'm telling you about, they got me back, they went through, they said, if you can find your red book, you can see, they gave me all the information, but it didn't really make me feel better, because they weren't actually really saying, we understand that was incredibly traumatic for you and you shouldn't have gone through it, we apologise to you. That's what I needed to hear, really. And you've been made to feel really bad, and that you somehow failed as a parent at that time, and you shouldn't have felt like that because it was an error on their part. So, we thought we would do is, when we were asked to do this, and all the range of statutory support that parents require, as you know, it's absolutely huge. I always say, it's so unfair as a parent that it's like, you might as well be told, right, now you've got to go and do a PhD, because the amount of information that you need is more than a PhD, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Our staff, we learn 10 things new every day that we didn't know. And we work at it full time, don't we? I've been in post 6 years. I learn as much in every day of my job as I did on day one. There is just so much to learn about for children with disabilities, and it's not out there for the general public. It is things that you have to actively go and find out about. Just as one example, in terms of additional support for learning, you've got mainstream education and everybody else does this, and everybody else has always done that. So that's what you know, and then suddenly you've got a whole different legal kind of setup to deal with. So this is why we just thought, well, it's be quite difficult within this session to sort of, cover a huge amount of information. And what we'll try and do is explain how we do things. And then obviously we cannot talk about as much as we can today, but if you had further questions, you'd be very welcome to come back to us. And if we can't answer them, then we try and find people who can answer questions. If parents, we're all sort of, how do I put this? You've all got something to offer other parents, really. And actually that's the best form of support. So how can we as an organisation just encourage everybody to have their own self-confidence and be able to share that with other parents? And, I think that if we could make that possible for people, then that would be very supportive. So the different things we've thought of within that are Facebook, website, support groups like meetings like this, our helpline and newsletter. So just on to talking about education, and at Kindred since April this year, we're in partnership with Govern Law in Glasgow, and we've secured a tender to provide advocacy to the tribunals in Scotland. So what that means is basically we've got solicitors who can advise us on the legal aspects of additional support for learning. We've run the helpline on additional support for learning since before I was in post, but I don't know how long we've run it for, but at least 7 years. So we provide information on the policies and processes, but also on the specific schools. Provide information on the legislation and policy, but they obviously have to cover the whole of Scotland, so they're not necessarily going to be able to tell you what why Red Hall is different from St Crispin's or whatever. And our helpline, if you ring it up, and we can also then, if you need our support, to go along to meetings. And the reason for that is we find, I've been doing a few meetings recently, and I'll meet with the parents beforehand, and they're really articulate, and they know exactly what they want to say, and we go through it all, and then we get in the meeting, and I'm really amazed. I'm sort of waiting. You are going to say this, this, and this, and people don't say it, and it's just the same for all of us. It's just the stress and emotion of the situation. It just stops your brain working. So you just have to say. And I think he wanted to mention about the fact that he does need help to go to the toilet, doesn't he? And then and then they'll say that bit. So the advocacy is a really important part of what we do. And then I was going to tell you a little bit about my own experience of education, which my son, he started school a year late, and he didn't have a diagnosis of autism, but everybody said he had autistic type behaviour. So we got a very good place actually in a language support unit in Midlothian, and he had a couple of very, very happy years there. But at the end of those 2 years, they said to us, we can't continue your place here because you haven't got a diagnosis of autism. So he was then moved to a special school. And when he was moved to the special school, I was just horrified when I went in, because the other children in the class, none of them were verbal, and he was very verbal. And I just thought, well, this can't be right, it's just not right, And we were sort of saying to the teacher, is this right? And she was going, it's not right. So the only way I could get him out was to ring up the psychologist and basically cry on the phone to, just say, really sort of break down on the phone and say, and she said, I'll go in, and she went in, and she came back and she said, it's just not at all right or appropriate, it's not right. So they moved him into another class. But because Midlothian's quite a small authority, there was basically 2 classes. One was very able children, and he can't, even now at the age of 19, he can just about write his name, so he couldn't really do any of that academic stuff, or this very profoundly disabled group. So what would happen would be every year they'd move him backwards and forwards, and they wouldn't tell me, and then he'd come home and sort of, Mum, guess who I'm in class with this year? Rush back into school and threaten them with tribunal, and then they'd move him back again. And, that's cutting a long story short, but I really regret that I didn't take my son out of there. And I know why it happened, and it's quite a long story, because they kept saying to me it's going to get better. We're going to have more children coming in at secondary, etc., etc. It just never, and they wouldn't tell us about the other children in the class, so we didn't really realise, and etc., etc. So, what I think, just to tell you a little bit more about my story, because I think it actually is relevant. At the age of 15, he did get a diagnosis of autism. So after all that, after being thrown out to somewhere where he was incredibly happy and well supported, and then another irony was that the other boys who did go to that primary school then came to join him at the special school anyway, so why couldn't he have stayed along with them? So he got a diagnosis of autism. And not only in the diagnosis, they didn't just say, oh, he's kind of quite autistic. It was like he's very, very severely autistic. After him being assessed a number of times and us being told, no, he doesn't have it, and being said, do you want a diagnosis of autism? If you want one, we'll give you one, if you really want one, kind of thing. And then finally you get this one, and they're like, he's severely autistic. And he we actually went through a really difficult time because he became incredibly ill. His autism went ballistic, and he just got incredibly obsessive, and he was up all night. He had to do these huge, great big rituals. If we tried to stop him doing the rituals, he'd get aggressive and violent. He was getting bigger and bigger. He's now over 6 foot. And so basically we were going into crisis, and we were just really, really appealing for help. And the problem is you just get so exhausted as well because you're up all night, so you can't really think straight anyway. But the CAMS team eventually came, and they literally said, we can solve this for you, but we need to have the intensive behavioural support team from Bernardo's. They'll come in for 3 months. They'll put in place the timetables and so on, which we never knew. We were told he wasn't autistic, so we never got the timetables and the symbols and so on to help him earlier. So we got to the sort of October, and this is kind of going slightly into the sort of transition bit. And when this promise, we'd had to wait 6 months for this service, so I rang up and said, so when are they coming? And our social worker said, this, that and the other, and oh, by the way, you're not getting that service after all. So at that point, you know, you just have huge kind of, I mean, what do? We just rang everybody, cried, shouted, rang the police, everything, and then 3 days later they said, okay, we will provide you with that service. And it has really, really helped us to understand how to manage his behaviour. So basically what we have to do is, you know, we have to be incredibly authoritative with him and just say, no, you can't check the lights 3 times, you can't have 6 pots that you have to wash yourself with, you can't say half a video every time you bite one bite of food. So you just have to get back in control. That's cutting a really, really long story short. But the reason I just wanted to tell you that was to really show how important getting the right education is. Because I think actually if we'd had the right class, that we'd never have got there. They would have seen much earlier on he was autistic. Our school was telling us he's incredibly anxious, and that's why he's got to go in this group with profoundly disabled children. And instead of saying he's autistic and therefore he needs, you know, a setup that suits a child with autism, and that will help him with his anxiety. But how do you get the right education if you don't? I mean, that was while I was working for Kindred. I had all that information at my fingertips, and I still wasn't able to get myself out of that situation. So this is why we provide the advocacy service, is that basically I don't think it matters, and we work with people from all walks of life, don't we? It doesn't matter if you're a professor. We work with some professors whose children have disabilities. We work with people who have very, very challenging issues themselves, you know, who have learning disability or mental health problems. But whoever you are, I think to do this alone is very, very difficult. And it's not to do with your abilities, it's to do with, you know, having to stand up for your child at that moment.
It's like that you were saying earlier about you go into an appointment with a paediatrician or an expert and you feel like you're not being taken seriously. So that's a common thing to hear. And the other thing as well is you can make a list of everything you're going to raise with a professional, and this has happened to me. And it goes out the window and you feel you're on their borrowed time. I've been for appointments before where I've literally been jogged along a corridor to go. And how do you even start with something as important as your child's education or health from that point of view? And I suppose the other thing, it's a very common message, is why does it keep does it keep taking for people to be in crisis, for people to want to find a solution rather than listening to the parent and
So just going on to the things that were raised in discussion, we had a talk about the nursing, and I think we were talking about the learning disability nurses and their roles, because certainly I found the learning disability nurse is the helpful person that you can almost raise anything with, and you know, if she doesn't know, she is quite a good person for referring you on to other places. But that also raised the suggestion that we have a glossary of terms on our website, which I think is a really good idea. And we talked quite a lot about, somebody else in the group, they mentioned the annual review at the school, and that being a good place that you just make sure you remember to bring your questions to that annual review when you get the chance to have everybody around. And we talked about how you have a good relationship with professionals, and you know, a lot of us feel that we're fighting all the time, and that is a real problem. But I still feel uncomfortable that I ended up with a really bad relationship with our school. I always felt that I was blamed, whereas my husband was the one they were all sort of, you know, I always felt the head teacher sort of battered her eyelids at me. When she saw me coming, it was like, oh no, not her. And maybe I fabricated that myself, but that's how I've been left feeling, that I was really unpopular. So, how, you know, that I think about, was the other thing we talked about was resilience and self-esteem for our children and young people. And who's focusing on this? You know, the professionals do their different roles, but who's really thinking about that child's overall well-being? Did you want to sum up the questions that you came up with?
We almost had areas of concern rather than questions as such. And one of the ones that came up, first of all, was just a very basic observation that you don't really have the school gate phenomenon at a lot of special schools, because there is no sort of natural gathering place for parents waiting to pick up their kids, you know, with different things about bus times and all the gates, everything being locked, etc., etc. And about how important perhaps other sort of peer support can be, and that different schools have perhaps different times where people can meet. This group, for example, is Alison was explaining, is sort of kind of trying to change things a bit by opening up so that all the special schools can meet together. So it's a real exchange of parent information, because actually you guys are slowly becoming the experts, even if organisations are helping you along the way. You're taking that information and you're making things happen with it and seeing if the information actually matches up in practice to what's going on in the real world. So that's quite an interesting, I think, point. And what Feast is doing sounds wonderful, trying to pull all the schools together. Something else that came up is rights around access to school doctors, with the idea that depending if your child is in mainstream, with a special support unit, or in some of the particular schools, they might be entitled to an annual appointment with the school doctor or paediatrician twice a year on entering and leaving. But actually here, for instance, you're not sure how often your child has the right to see a doctor or to get, it's, as you said, it's almost as if it's left for parents to pick up the medical issues, and is that right, kind of thing? Something else that was mentioned is that there can be monitoring of developmental stages, but actually that information is not often passed on to parents. It could be really useful to know. It's not sort of formally passed on as part of the school report or anything like that. And again, it's left for the parents to chase these things and find these things. Another thing that was coming up is sort of your eligibility, if you like, to press for different kinds of reports, your rights in terms of requesting something, and then the timescale till you get it. And the PEPR report was something that was mentioned. How do you encourage professionals to take seriously parents' instincts about their children, which came right back to your talk earlier, Sophie, but that's just a message you hear the whole way through at the child's time at school. I don't know how you get around that, but if anyone's got any ideas. The other thing that is constantly frustrating, and I think, again, you need resilience to get through it, is the lack of joined-up thinking across the medical disciplines. So you'll wait 6 months for an OT appointment, then that might lead to another referral, you're waiting another 6 months for a different appointment, but actually that's a huge chunk of your child's life and education that's gone by in the meanwhile. Again, what could we do to sort of help encourage that? And again, how could we pull in the idea of parent support groups and web information and things like that to help these things happen? It might seem like a huge leap, but actually it is a resource that a lot of people have at their disposal at the moment to share information. Again, this was about in different locations. You have the developmental centres where a child is sort of seen holistically, but we don't have anything like that here in Edinburgh. Everything's sort of disjointed. Getting it right for every child, Gerthic, in theory, it should be here, it should be working, but in practice, is it actually working, and what can we do to make everyone pull together? So we haven't got so much sort of suggestions as areas of concern, really.